All right, well, good afternoon. Thanks so much for joining us for the first of two webinars all about round three of the Auburn Downtown Revitalization Initiative, better known as the DRI, Small Project Grant Program. The application period is currently open and will accept applications through November 17th, 2023. Today's episode will be recorded and is currently recorded and made available on our website and on our YouTube channel for future reference. In the interest of time, I'm going to introduce my colleague, Paul Vigiano, who will introduce himself and dive into the details of this grant program.
Good afternoon, everybody. Yes, I am Paul Vigiano from CETA. I am the Small Business Development Specialist, and I will be the go-to guy to help you out with this application process. So please be sure to email me at pvigiano@cugaeda.org. That's spelled P-V as in Victor, I-G-G-I-A-N-O at cugaeda for Economic Development Agency.org, or call me on the phone here and leave me a voicemail if I can't pick up, 315-612-3896. As Lauren mentioned, we have our great host here, Tracy Verrier. Tracy Verrier is here today, and she will be explaining the nitty-gritty details of the DRI Round 3 grant. It has changed a little bit since the first two rounds, but let's get into it with the slides, and we'll start talking about what this new grant entails. So you see there's a map on the, I'm sorry? There's a map on the, any questions? Any questions? No, not yet. Okay, there's a map on the screen, and you'll see that it's kind of hard to read, but if you, again, give us a call, I'm happy to explain to you if your business fits within this boundary. It is the Downtown Revitalization Initiative. There is a boundary, there's a map there we have to follow. So please, if there's any confusion, do give us a call. Let's start with that. You have to have the business inside this district in order to be applicable. Obviously, it's for profitable businesses. We're also accepting applications for non-for-profits as well, and any entrepreneurs who are starting a business and or people who have already been in business for a while are happy to apply. We are located in the boundary. Okay, locally owned chains, locally owned businesses are accepted. Corporate chains and franchises are not eligible. The business owner must be current on all their federal, state, and local taxes, as the slide mentions. Demonstrate site control, which meaning that basically, even if you don't have a spot yet to do your business, you have some type of leasehold agreement that you will be operating in a certain space within the district. So that's important to know. You have to have something that you're working with, an actual site location. And we have to be relevant with zoning codes, permitting, design, signage, and all those other things that the city is going to expect as far as zoning and codes go. And there has to be a documented plan that you are committed to financing the project 100% on your own, because this grant money will be given to you in arrears, meaning that you're going to have all the money up front, but you'll know exactly how much you'll be getting, obviously, before we start the project to move forward. But all the money comes up front. Then we go through our checklist, and it does take a while for you guys to get your reimbursement checks later on. So I think that covers slide 1 for the most part. And then to get more into the details, reimbursement activities would include on the site, interior or exterior renovations or leasehold improvements with the landlord approval. Signage will be a good one. Soft costs, architecture, engineering, and environmental testing, permanent machinery and equipment. Please note that things will be, oh, I'm sorry, let me go back to ineligible. So that's eligible costs. Ineligible will be acquiring a new building, any kind of new construction, or site work or ancillary activities. Any improvements to structures owned by religious or private membership-based organizations will not be accepted. Improvements to municipally owned and municipally operated buildings will not be accepted. And anything involving getting new furnishings, appliances, electronic tools, disposable supplies, small non-permanent business equipment will not be accepted as well. Vehicles or other rolling stock. So we can see pretty clearly that it's a small section of people that might be eligible for this grant as far as what the activities that are involved are going to be part of the activation process. There is also a project fee that you will have to come up with. You will pay that after the fact, but all award applicants will be required to pay a project fee of $550. This will pay for expenses related to the acquired environmental review. Upon successful completion of the project, you will be reimbursed a portion of this. So again, you'll not have to apply or spend that money right away. You'll apply, obviously it's free to apply. We'll go through the scoring criteria. A committee will do that. It will not be me. Tracy will be in charge of all that. And basically, If you get accepted and you are awarded X amount of dollars, you will then have to move forward and pay the $550 fee. I think that takes care of that slide. Thank you. The matching requirements. So here's an example of how this could possibly work. If you are completely brand new and you're starting, we're calling it entrepreneurial seed funding. The grant amount on either side, whether it's an existing business or a new business, will not exceed over $50,000. That's the first key thing to remember. So that's it, up to $50,000. But example one, if your total project costs are $62,500 and your grant amount is $50,000, the match amount will be $12,500. Now, again, keep in mind that all of that money, the $62,000 will have to come up out of your pocket first, and then you'll get reimbursed the grant money later on. Same difference with an existing business, with the example showing $71,429 up to $50,000 in grant money, with the match amount being $21,429. Documentation for reimbursement for both reimbursable expenses and match. Applicant must submit an invoice or vendor letterhead and proof of payment. And I think Tracy will get more into the details of all how that's all going to work. And she can carry it out from here. So let me introduce you guys to Tracy Verrier, and she will get into the more of the nitty-gritty details of how this is all going to work. But again, please do give me a call or send me an email if you have any questions about applying for this grant. Okay, thank you so much. Tracy?
Thanks, Paul. So what I'll say here is that just because you can apply for up to $50,000, you don't have to. You can apply for a smaller amount. We do have currently we have about $96,000 in the pot. So we don't have a lot of funding to go around. So don't be afraid to apply if you have a smaller project than what is showing here. If you've, got a $20,000 project, you can go ahead and apply for that. Just know that you'll have to cover 20% if you're an entrepreneurial applicant or 30% if you're an existing business applicant. You do not have to apply for $50,000. You just can't apply for more than $50,000. So as you get into the application, this is available on CETA's website now. You can download the application and fill it out. We just want to clarify and give some guidance on how to do that. And so when you are looking at the application, there is a spot that asks for a project description and timeline. When you're writing your project description, it's really helpful to be clear as to what it is you're going to do with the grant funding and your match. We want to know exactly what is going to be funded by the project so that we can be clear that everything is eligible and that there's an obvious outcome that's going to come from your project. Be detailed and explain the different aspects of your project. So if you're going to do signage and some leasehold improvements, be sure to explain to us, what is that signage? Is it over the door? Is it an awning? Just explain to us what that is. And then also explain to us what your leasehold improvements are going to entail. So don't just say, I'm going to buy a sign. Give us a little bit more detail than that so we can understand what type of sign it is, make sure that it's a permanent sign and not a temporary sign, and those types of things. It'll just help in the process as we go. Explain any impacts to the structure your project might be making. This will make it easier down the road because we will have to get certain approvals from the state. And if you're in a historic building, this will have an impact. So we just like to know up front. And then if you're including equipment, make sure to give us a list of the type of equipment that you're planning to purchase. That way we can confirm that it's all permanent machinery and equipment, and make sure that it's all eligible.
Tracy, I have a question for you
yes.
guys. How helpful would it be in this particular section of the application for them to have actual estimates of what these products or these like a sign, how much would a sign cost, for example? Is it okay to submit an estimate and maybe a JPEG image or a picture of some sort, or is that too much information?
You certainly could if you have something. You are going to be asked, and we'll talk about the budget, but you are going to be asked to fill out a budget. However, know that you're going to have to go through a very specific bidding process, which I'll talk about later. So you don't necessarily need to have everything super buttoned up. You just need to have a good enough understanding of the budget to be able to fill out that part of the application. But if there is a picture or a rendering or an example of the work that you're going to do or what you're going to get, by all means, attach that to the application. It'll just make it that much easier for us to review it and make sure that your project is eligible.
Great, thank you.
In terms of your project timeline, be realistic. Don't think that you're going to get a roofer next week, because you're not. make sure you're using actual increments of time. So like it might be, you know, it'll take us, we think it'll take 6 months to complete this work once it starts. And that'll just give us a pretty good idea of where your end date might be. And make sure that you're giving yourself enough time to actually complete the projects. Don't stress your timeline, because what we're also doing is working with the state to make sure the program stays open for long enough for everyone to finish their stuff. So it's really helpful for us if you're providing a realistic timeline, so that we can plan the programming accordingly. Also keep in mind, and we'll talk again more about this later, that there's going to be a gap from when things are awarded to when you can start your project. So just keep that in mind as well. It's going to be 2-3 months before you can even start your project. So don't put in an application saying you're going to start your project December 1st, because there's a whole process we need to go through before you can even start. We're really looking for projects that are going to start in the spring or later.
And this grant does not allow you to do a back throw, correct? You cannot have the project started already, or you're in the middle of a project. That doesn't, it's not acceptable to do that. So our timeline, like you mentioned, I think it's kind of important, Tracy. November is when we're going to stop taking applications. The committee will need at least a month or two to go through the applications, correct? So now we're in, let's say, the end of January of 2024, and then awarded. I don't want to give you a timeline that's not right, but would you say maybe by the end of February we would have actual award agreements in place by then?
I'm hoping that we can, that we can actually announce awards in January and start the process with the awarded applicants, so that folks can plan on starting in the April timeframe. So think about that when you're thinking about your timeline. Is think about April as a start date for your project. And what Paul was just saying about the throwbacks, like if you've already spent money on something, you cannot apply to have that reimbursed now. It's only for things in the future that are specifically outlined in the application.
Perfect, thank you.
Any questions before I move on past the timeline? So another big part of the application is the budget. You see a table like this, and you can see underneath this, these blue things aren't actually on the application. This is for demonstration purposes, but you'll fill in this table with the amounts. Owner is going to be your equity investment, so that's your match. The owner is, that if you have cash that you're putting into the fund, into the project, or if you're using a bank, if you're getting a loan, you put that in the loan or in the bank column. What the $50,000 or up to $50,000 you're asking to be reimbursed, that goes in the DRI grant column, and you can see ineligible things are blocked out. You're not going to be able to enter an amount into a line that is not eligible. The SBAP loan is a local loan program offered by the city of Auburn. It's for small businesses, gap financing, generally low interest compared to banking partners. And if you're not able to get bank financing, this might be a way. It's the same committee that does the scoring for this program. So this might be a way to help get some funding to do the project up front before you're reimbursed. And you can talk to Paul about that as well, if that is something you're interested in. But you'll see here, it's the uses of funds is outlined in this first column. So if you're going to do signage, you would put, let's just say you're going to use all your own cash for the match and the DRI grant for the rest. You would put, if you're an entrepreneur, 20% under owner and 80% under DRI grant. And then total everything up at the end.
So a simple example, I own a shop. I've been in business for 5 years. I want to do a new sign. The new sign is $20,000, or I'm not sure what they would cost. Maybe it's $10,000. So $10,000, but I'd have to have at least 20%, no, 30% of that money as a new business, 20% as an existing business, 30. I gotta have at least $3,000 for, I have to have the whole 10 in the beginning.
Yes.
But 3,000 for sure out of my own pocket. And then the committee will decide out of that remaining amount of money, let's say it's 10,000 minus 3 is 7, the $7,000, they will vote to whether or not they'll give me the entire, no, only half of that amount, correct? Up to 50%. No,
No,
I'm wrong on that note. See, I'm glad I had this conversation with you. So they can possibly get the entire amount, up to $7,000. As a
Yes,
small example.
so a $10,000 sign, 3,000 would say go under owner, and 7,000 would go under DRI grant for existing businesses.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you, sir, for explaining that
Yes.
to me, Tracy.
And then just total everything up at the end. If anyone's having trouble with the budget table, like just ask. Like, I'm happy to help with this. I'm sure I'll work with Paul on it. Like, I'm sure we can help through this budget table because it's not the most intuitive thing if you don't do something like this all the time. So don't hesitate to reach out and ask for help filling this out. A lot of people struggle with it.
Great.
Working capital, because this was launched during COVID, it can be used as match as well. So you could, like, we can't fund rent, utilities, inventory with the DRI grant, but you can also use it as match. So if you want to do that, you could say, put your working capital here, like a couple months of rent, and then make sure that's 20% of like your sign, and you could do the full amount of the sign here. So the key is just like of the total number, 20 or 30% is coming from other sources, bank, whatever.
Got it.
So the application submission, we're doing this a little bit differently this time. We're actually doing it through a Drive uploader. And this is going to go directly into a Google Drive folder for us. And it makes it a lot easier than emails because attachments get lost in the Ethernet all the time. So what we'll ask you to do is, first of all, the deadline, as Paul mentioned, is November 17th. If you want assistance or you want us to review your application before final submission, please reach out before November 7th. After that, we'll help as much as we can, but depending on how much demand there is, we just don't want to get into a position where someone reaches out on the 16th and we just don't have the capacity to help. So please do reach out by November 7th to be guaranteed review and feedback on your application if you want that. Once your application is final, you would use this link, which is on the application, and I think it's on the website. And what'll come up is a Drive uploader page. There's two ways to do this. I think the easiest way to do it is to hit select files, and then this browser view will come up. It's like any other folder view you have. And you would just select all the full files that you want to upload using the control. If you hit control and then you click multiple items, you can select multiple items and hit open down here. And that will automatically upload your documents to the folder that it needs to go to. And then you should get, it'll ask you for your name and email address, and then you should get a page that looks like this that says successfully uploaded. If you miss a document or you only do one document and you need to do more, you can do it multiple times. That's fine. The other way you can do it is have your file open and control click for multiple and just drag over here. You can drag and drop as well. But if you need to do it multiple times, that's fine. Or if you want to do it all at once, that's fine too. Just as long as we get all of your documents.
So Tracy, another question for our clients. I'm going to highly recommend, first of all, that they actually do give me a call, please. I think it's better to review these applications before you submit them, because, and tell me if I'm wrong, you guys, if they don't come to us for assistance and they just upload something, and maybe there's something wrong with the submission, not that it didn't get accepted, but like just their actual submission is not complete, you are not going to go back to them afterward and say, hey, we're missing a document, or we need this, or we need that, correct? I mean, the committee doesn't take the time to say, well, we need more information from this person about this project, therefore we'll give them a call now. It doesn't work that way. Or am I incorrect?
So after the deadline, if you submit early, we'll take a look and just make sure everything's there, but we might not know that something is missing. If you were going to update or like upload a rendering and you missed it, we might not know that you intended to do that, or like a lease agreement. So it's good to check in. After the deadline, we won't be following up with people. to make corrections at that point. The deadline is the deadline. So make sure that your application is complete before the deadline.
Great, perfect, thank you.
Okay. Now, so we're past the deadline, you've submitted your application. Now we're getting into what happens next after the application process. This is a competitive process. It's likely that not all applications are going to get funded. Again, we only have about $96,000. So if we have 10 applications, it's very likely that only a portion of those will get any kind of funding. Also be aware that the committee could award less than your requested amount. And so you might have to adjust your project scope accordingly if that's the case. So the scoring committee is the Auburn SBAP Loan Committee, which I mentioned earlier. They have the loan program as well. And we did that on purpose in case anyone does need gap financing. But it's that committee that makes decisions. They use this scoring criteria and these are all weighted equally. So they use this scoring criteria to determine the projects or to prioritize the projects and rank the projects. One is readiness. So we're going to be looking at your timeline and making sure it's reasonable, making sure the budget makes sense, that, you're experienced or you have people on board with you who are experienced with these types of projects. So if you're doing like a construction project, it's good to know that someone around you has done a construction project before, even if it's not you, or you have like a banker that's really experienced or, something like that. This is also where we're going to be looking for your site control. So if you are an entrepreneur and you don't quite have a lease yet, it would be good to have a draft lease at the very least so that we can see that you have a location, it's in the boundary, and there's true intention of moving forward. Applications that come to us without a site identified will not score well under readiness. Economic impact, this is where we're talking about job creation and supporting the local economy, preserving historic properties. Then we're going to look at quality of life. What does this mean for people living in the community and utilizing these spaces? And then finally, the DRI priorities were set when we first applied for the DRI a number of years ago. And I think back in 2019, we set these, and we're going to see how projects align with these priorities, about reinventing downtown as a vibrant center, promoting Auburn and engaging, educating, and welcoming residents and visitors, beautifying streetscapes and public spaces, and enhancing and preserving and activating the city's architecture and urban fabric. So we're going to be comparing applications and projects to these priorities and all of these scoring criteria. Each is going to be worth 25 points for a total of 100 points, and that will help us to rank projects for funding.
And it does mention applicants will be invited to present their project. So does that mean, obviously, after the scoring is done, you may not be accepted into that level? If you are accepted, afterward, people will be invited to present their projects to the committee?
Yeah, we'll see how many applications we get. And then if we need to only invite the top 5, we'll do that, but we'll see how many projects we have and how many applicants we have, and then determine who we can invite in to make presentations. Last time we did that virtually via Zoom. That might or might not be the case this time, but it's always good to hear from the applicants what they're intending to do, and it gives the committee a chance to ask questions.
Great, thank you.
So this is a project timeline after the award. So the first thing that's going to happen is we're going to say, hey, you've been awarded. Congratulations, really excited about your project. Please give us your $550 initiation fee, project fee, and we'll work with you on developing your final scope of work. And we do that so that if you got a partial funding, or if not every detail was worked out, we'll work with you on developing that scope of work to make sure it's complete and accurate. And then this $550, what it does is it goes towards some of the different aspects of step number 2 on the environmental review. So we have to do a hazardous materials assessment, and that costs about $500. And then we need to get a zoning letter from the city, and that costs $50. So it's really just paying for things that are happening in step 2. And at the end of your project, should you complete it, you'll get either the 70 or 80% back based on what type of applicant you are. So if you have a 20% match because you're an entrepreneur, you'll get 80% of that $550 back with your final disbursement. If you don't complete your project, the $550 is forfeited. So step 2, this is, oh, go ahead, Paul.
Go ahead. No, I'm going to ask you about step 2. So go ahead, please.
Okay. So step 2, there's a checklist that the state gives us that we need to complete for each project, which involves, like I said, that environmental review. It involves that zoning letter. We have to submit to the State Historic Preservation Office and get an approval from them. So, well, it's not really an approval, but we'll call it that for the sake of simplicity. So that's why we need your scope of work, because we need to tell SHPO, the State Historic Preservation Office, exactly what you're doing, exactly what building you're going to be in, and they will tell us whether or not there's any historic concerns and whether there's any steps you should take to preserve the historic nature of the building. So a lot of this work will actually be done on my side, on our side. We'll need some information from you, but we're filling out most of these forms. It just takes some time because we need to often wait for that report, that environmental report to come in and that zoning letter to come in and to get the response from SHPO. So this step can take, a few weeks up to a couple of months. And that's part of why we're saying there's a long timeline before you can start your project. So just be aware of that, because no one's dragging their feet. It's just there's a lot of moving parts here, and there's a lot of different players involved, and each one controls their own part of the process.
So can I stop you right there? So I got awarded. I'm a small business owner. I got an award for $10,000. And it goes to step 2. You guys get some information from me. You do your due diligence. And suddenly I have an issue with lead paint in my building. What's going to happen next? I have to fix the lead paint issue, correct?
Well, since we're not doing residential this round, we're not going to be doing lead paint testing.
Okay, forget that.
This round, we're only doing business projects. So lead paint testing is actually not required unless maybe if you're doing like a common area that residents are share with your business area. But for the most part, we're not going to have lead paint issues in this round, except for certain very specific circumstances. But to your, I think the question you're actually asking is, okay, SHPO comes back and says that I can't do the project the way I want to do it. I want to make leasehold improvements, but they say I need to preserve XYZ, or they're recommending that I should be preserving the width of this stairwell or this window opening. And it's getting to be too much, and I just can't do it. At that point, there would have to be a decision made about how you want to move forward with the project. If you want to make the adjustments that are being requested, or the remediation that needs, whatever remediation needs to happen, if you want to do that, or if that is too burdensome for the project that you're doing. Part of why these programs are so lucrative, quote unquote, and covering 70 to 80% of the project is in part because they are going to ask you to do some extra things. And so knowing that at the end, you're going to have only a 20% investment, is the change or the remediation they're asking you to make worth that? And so that's a decision we have to make at this point before we move on in the process. I haven't had a lot of those instances, but we did have one project drop out specifically because of one of these requirements. But this is the point at which we would do it.
And at that point, again, like you mentioned earlier, you've lost your 550, right?
Yes.
You're going to get that back. There's no going back on that. And of course, keep in mind, you probably should have a little more extra money on the side for something that may have to get reconciled for some reason.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
So once we're through the environmental review and we have a determination from the state, please don't do anything else until this is done. Like, this is a key point, and you don't want to start spending money or going out and talking to contractors until you know you have this. But once again, it hasn't often been the case that this has been a problem. It just takes time, and occasionally there are things that come back that need to be addressed. So make sure you have this determination before we move on. Once we have that determination, we'll put together a project agreement, a grant agreement with you. You'll sign it, CETA will sign it, and that just outlines the legalese of the grant process, what you're committed to doing, what CETA is committed to doing, etc. And then we can go into bidding. I mentioned before, there's a very specific bidding process. So put together some bid documents and send those out to contractors. You'll want to try to send it out to women-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses, and keep track of who you're sending it to so that we can show that you did outreach to MWBEs, the women and minority-owned businesses. Those bids, though, they have to come back to us directly. They can't go to you. So you have to put in your bid documents to send quotes and bids to CETA, to State Street, or Tracy at her email address. And once we have all of the bids, we'll sit down with you, we'll review them with you, make sure they're all comparable, and then you get to make the decision who you use. One key thing here is that they will only reimburse based on the lowest bid. So you can choose other than the lowest bid. It's just you won't be reimbursed for that difference. You'll be reimbursed based on the low bid. So it's just, and we'll go over that again with you as we get there, but just know there's a very specific bid process. So don't get ahead of yourself and start bidding while we're doing the environmental review, because we'll want to make sure that those steps are taken appropriately. You do have to have 2 bids for each piece of your project, and then, or each component of your project. If you can't get 2 bids, we'll have to document that you tried to get multiple bids, and you can send us your list of who you reached out to, who you didn't get responses from, who you got no bids from, and usually we can work that out with the state.
And with the MWBE component, is there a percentage? Like, is it like 50% of the?
We're trying to hit 30%.
30%.
We're covering that a bit with the firm that does the hazardous materials assessment. So we're covering that to some extent, but we do encourage projects to do up to at least 30% MWBEs if they can find them.
So in essence, 3 bids per scope per project would make more
2
sense.
bids.
You said 2, but then how can a third? I guess how can a third of that be MWBE? I'm trying to figure that out.
Well, so like it's a third of your project cost.
Oh, depending on what the projects
Yeah.
are. Okay.
So if you're getting someone to come in and do drywalling, someone to come in and install signage, and someone to come in and update your sprinklers or whatever, you need to get 2 bids for each of those components. And ideally, 30% of your total project cost between those 3 components would be with an MWBE. Does that make more sense?
Yes. And what happens if, let's say the drywall component, let's just as an example, I can get the 2 bids and the bids are kind of nuts and Uncle Sam can do it for a quarter of the price. Then what do I do?
Absolutely not. You cannot do your own work. You cannot have family members do work for you. So like, even if your cousin, or no, cousins are actually okay. This is what we learned. Cousins are okay. If your brother owns a construction company, you cannot use your brother.
Okay.
So be very, or your parents, like your immediate family, you cannot use them as contractors.
Fair enough. Thank you.
You can't do it yourself.
Okay. Step 5.
Step 5. So then you get to do your project. Bids are done. Go ahead, do your project. Me or Paul will stop by before, in the middle, and at the end to do project instruction or monitoring visits. They're not, we'll just ask for tour, like they're not super invasive, like we're not checking the quality of work. Like we just want to like make sure that things are happening the way that you said they were going to happen, and also that things are happening safely. We're not construction experts, so we're not doing like code inspections. We're just looking around and making sure that things seem to be what you said they were going to be. If it feels like things are moving in a different direction, we might ask to do an additional inspection during that time to make sure. But generally speaking, it's going to be 3 inspections before, during, and after. But for the most part, you're doing your project. You just have to keep us in the loop. We'll take some pictures as well. And then once your project is done.
I'm sorry,
okay.
and this is just let people know, this is not because we're trying to be mean. This is because it's a government requirement. It's part of the grant requirement, correct? So
Yes.
they should be aware that this is why we're doing it. It's not just that we want to check out, be nosy. We have to really have this information verified for the grant to work.
Yes, and we do have to submit before and after pictures with your reimbursement request. So it's really important that we do these. They don't typically take that long. Even when it's been like a whole building, it'll take less than 45 minutes. And that's if like we do the whole tour. So we're not talking about, going through the building and checking every fire alarm and everything. We're just looking around, making sure things are good to go, So once you have completed your project, you're going to get your, depending on the scope of your project, maybe you'll need a certificate of occupancy. But like once we can say your project is done and you can use that space, we'll submit for reimbursement. So we'll fill out some paperwork. You're going to have to provide to us invoices and some form of proof of payment. This could be like a credit card receipt. It could be, a paid statement from a vendor. Most of the time it's canceled checks. So you would ask your bank to give you copies of canceled checks. We just need to show that your vendor actually got your money. And it's not a situation where like you wrote them a check, but they're holding it because their process is slow. They need to cash that check and we need a copy of the canceled check. The state has gotten very tight around some of these loopholes. So we need to see that they got the money. We put all of that into a report, send it to the state. They provide an approval, and then what they'll do is they'll transfer the money to CETA, and CETA within 7 days of that will need to turn it around and give it to you. Usually takes the state, it can take up to 6 weeks. Lately, I've been seeing it like more like 3 or 4. But we just want to make sure that that reimbursement documentation is up to date or is correct when we submit it.
So Tracy, I got a question. So, and it's probably self-explanatory, but so the new drywall is $10,000. I got approved for the 7. I'm ready to go, but the actual project cost 12. There was a glitch in the system. They didn't see something ahead of time. Does that change my benefit at all?
Usually no.
Okay.
You're gonna get up to what you were awarded.
Okay. And could there be a chance I get less than what I was awarded? There could be that chance too if I didn't follow through and do the key things that I was in my scope of work that I was detailing in the beginning.
Yes. If something went wrong in the process and you didn't follow the rules or you didn't do something that was required, you could get less or nothing. So you really want to make sure you're doing things according to the process.
Okay.
The other thing we're going to ask you for at that point is a property maintenance declaration. And what this is it's a agreement that says, I am going to maintain this project that I just did. Now that it's complete, I'm going to maintain it for 3 years. And you sign that, CETA signs that, it gets filed at the clerk's office. And that is what leads to number 7, which is compliance monitoring. Once a year for those 3 years, someone will come and check up and just make sure what you did is still there. Obviously life happens. you know, if like you did drywall and then there was a flood and you had to redo the drywall, like that's life. But they want to see that you're not selling the building, or you're not like destroying something that was funded by the state.
So something horrible happens and I'm moving out of state and I'm going to sell my entire business. We're only in year 1.5 and the compliance business is not going to make sense 2 years in. What happens to me? Do I have to pay back that money that you guys gave?
There are clawback provisions. So, if it's within year 1, you have to pay back 100% of the money. If it's year 2, and then it goes down by thirds. So, year 2, it's 66% you need to pay back. Year 3, it's 33% you need to pay back, and then you're free.
Okay.
So there are consequences for not maintaining the project for 3 years.
Understood.
And then you're done with us.
You're free. 3 years later, you're free.
So yeah, before I get into next steps, any questions? More questions, please ask them now.
No questions have come through the chat, Tracy, but I did message everyone. If they had any questions, feel free to send them over.
So I'll come back and ask again before we wrap up, but next steps, again, that review deadline, November 7th. If you really want to be guaranteed that feedback and a review of your application, please get it to Paul before that, or myself, depending on who you're talking to at that point. Submit by the end of the day on the 17th. And then we'll try to get the committee together in December to make awards kind of early 2024. This is Paul's contact information that he mentioned earlier. He'll be your first point of contact. So if you're interested in the program, reach out to Paul. He'll look through things, talk to you about your project, make sure everything you're talking about is eligible. If things get a little tricky, he'll pull me in, but yeah, he'll be that first point of contact for you.
Yes, please do call me. I love to talk, so it's a good thing. So just don't, or email me if it's better for you, but we can't get texts on that. That's the office phone number, but you can certainly call me, leave me a voicemail, or email me anytime. And please do.
So again, any questions? It's a lot. I'm sorry. It is a lot. But like Paul said, just reach out. Like we'll work through it with you. The last thing we want is for someone to not apply because it's too complicated. We'll work with you through that process.
Yeah. And I think you did a great job explaining everything, Tracy. And I think the important thing to remember is if you need the money tomorrow, this might not be the right program for you, correct? That's really what the gist of this is. Correct. And there is only $96,000 in the entire pot. So depending on how many people apply for this program, getting up to 50 is a chance, you might be taking. So please don't expect the entire up to $50,000 because we only have the remaining amount left over in round 3 here. And again, our dates, our timeline, like Tracy said, let's say the money's awarded by the end of January. We can't get to the minutia of it all until probably spring, meaning you can't really start your project till end of March, April. And then we go from there. And we'll be monitoring this the entire way through. So you're not free of us for 3 years, just so you guys know. And we appreciate, we want to be here to help you guys and see you all grow. It's not about trying to hinder you in any way whatsoever. We just have to follow the regulations by our government. Okay. So again, call Paul. Tracy's going to be very involved with all this. So if I don't know the answer, she does, I'm sure. And we'll go from there. But any other questions, like Tracy said, please, we're here to help.
Perfect. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. So feel free to stay on if you do have other questions and you don't want them to be recorded. Thank you so much.
Lauren.
Thank you.